A rain-soaked night in Paris reunites Rosé and Bruno, where buried love, tears, and a devastating confession collide. "I never forgot you," Rosé said, her voice breaking as rain hammered the empty Paris street, and Bruno froze with her name trembling on his lips. The words slipped out of her like a wound torn open, raw and unstoppable, just as thunder rolled above the narrow boulevard. Bruno stood there, soaked through his coat, staring at her as if the city itself had tilted off its axis. The yellow glow of a lone street lamp framed her face, eyes red, lashes heavy with rain and tears, lips shaking as though holding back years of silence had finally become too much. The rain was cold, relentless, soaking into their clothes and skin, but neither of them moved. Paris breathed around them in muted sounds, the distant hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the echo of laughter from a cafe down the street, the low hum of the city that never stopped loving even when people did. Bruno took a step forward without thinking. His heart was beating too fast, too loud, like a drum he could no longer control. He had practiced this moment 1,000 times in his head, if he ever saw her again, if fate was cruel enough or kind enough to bring her back. But none of those rehearsals prepared him for the way she looked now. Smaller, braver, broken in a way that mirrored him too closely. "Rosé," he said, and her name cracked in his throat. She laughed weakly, the sound dissolving into a sob. "Don't say it like that," she whispered, "like you didn't spend years trying to forget me." That was the cruelest part. He had tried. God knew he had tried. New cities, new songs, new faces, applause that roared like oceans. Nights filled with music and mornings hollowed out by the same old ache. Every love song he wrote bent back toward her, even when he pretended it didn't. Especially when he pretended it didn't. "I didn't forget," he admitted, the truth heavy and terrifying on his tongue. "I just learned how to survive without you." The rain intensified, streaking down his face so no one could tell where the water ended and his tears began. Rosé closed her eyes as if his words had finally confirmed the fear she'd carried across continents. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms, a habit she'd had since the first night they'd fought and said things neither of them could take back. "You left," she said, her voice low, shaking. "You walked away like it was the only choice." "It was the only choice that didn't destroy you," he shot back, pain flashing across his features. "You were drowning in expectations. I was becoming the headline everyone wanted to tear apart, if I stayed." "I didn't ask you to save me," she interrupted, tears spilling freely now. "I just wanted you to stay." The words hung between them, fragile and devastating. Bruno's breath hitched as memory flooded in late nights in studio corners, her head resting on his shoulder as melodies came alive. Her laugh when he messed up lyrics on purpose just to hear it again. The way she used to hum when she was nervous, soft and unconscious. He reached out before his fear could stop him, his hand hovering inches from her arm. "I was afraid," he said quietly. "Afraid that loving you would ruin everything you worked for." Rosé opened her eyes then, and the hurt in them nearly brought him to his knees. "And I was afraid," she said, stepping closer, "that being without you would ruin me." The distance between them vanished. She pressed her forehead against his chest, a sob tearing through her as if her body finally recognized home. Bruno's arms wrapped around her instinctively, strong and trembling, pulling her close as though letting go now would be fatal. The world narrowed to the sound of rain, her breath hitching against his heart, his hands clutching the back of her coat as if she might disappear again. Her tears soaked into his shirt, warm and real, and he held her tighter, burying his face in her hair. It smelled faintly of roses and rain and something achingly familiar. His shoulders shook as he let himself cry for the first time in years, not for the loss, not for the fame or the loneliness, but for the love he had never truly buried. "I dreamed about this," she whispered into him, "standing here, telling you everything, and every time I woke up alone." "I'm here," he murmured, his voice rough. "I'm not going anywhere tonight." They stayed like that, clinging to each other in the downpour, two people who had loved too deeply and paid for it in silence. Paris watched them with indifferent grace, as it always did, bearing witness to confessions, heartbreaks, and reunions that changed lives without ever asking permission. Eventually, Rosé pulled back just enough to look at him. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes swollen, but there was a fierce honesty in her gaze. "There are things you don't know," she said. "Things I never said because I thought you'd already chosen to leave." Bruno brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, his thumb lingering against her cheek. "Then tell me now," he said. "Tell me everything. I can take it." She inhaled shakily, the weight of unspoken years pressing down on her chest. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rang, slow and solemn, marking the hour. Rosé looked up at the Parisian sky, rain streaking past like falling stars, and then back at the man she had never stopped loving. "Loving you," she said softly, "was never the problem, losing you was." He leaned down then, resting his forehead against hers, eyes closed as if steadying himself against the truth they were finally facing together. The rain continued to fall, relentless and cleansing, as if the city itself was trying to wash away the years they had spent apart. The rain had softened into a fine mist by the time they stepped inside the narrow apartment Bruno had rented under a false name, the door closing behind them with a dull, final sound that made Rosé's breath catch. The silence was suddenly too loud. Water dripped from their coats onto the wooden floor, ticking like a countdown. Bruno leaned his back against the door for a moment, eyes closed, chest rising too fast. Rosé stood a few steps away, arms wrapped around herself, as if the warmth of his embrace outside had already begun to fade and she was afraid to lose it again. "Say something," she whispered, her voice sharp with fear. "If we stop talking now, I might convince myself that this isn't real." Bruno opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her, standing there soaked and shaking, brave enough to follow him inside but still ready to run if he asked. "I'm afraid that if I start," he said, pushing himself off the door, "I won't know how to stop." "That's the point," Rosé shot back, tears threatening again. "We stopped for years, look where that got us." He let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his wet hair. "You think I didn't want to call you? Every night I picked up my phone. Every night I told myself you were better without the chaos I bring." "And who decided that?" she demanded, stepping closer. "You, or the headlines, or the managers who kept telling us what love was allowed to look like." The word managers landed like a slap. Bruno's jaw tightened. "You don't know everything," he said quietly. "You never saw the contracts, the threats, the meetings where they told me your name alone could burn careers." Rosé's eyes widened, anger and disbelief colliding. "So you chose silence," she said, voice rising. "You chose to disappear and let me drown in rumors, let me wonder if I was ever more than a secret you were ashamed of." "That's not fair," he snapped, the first crack of real heat between them. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" she fired back. "From loving you out loud." The words echoed in the small room. Bruno turned away, packing, hands fisting at his sides. He stopped in front of the window, staring out at the blurred Paris lights, his reflection fractured in the glass. "I wrote an album about you," he said suddenly. "And I buried it, track by track, because every lyric felt like betraying the promise I made to stay away." Rosé froze. "You what?" He turned, eyes dark, raw. "Every song you never heard, every melody that hurt too much. I erased you from the credits, from my interviews, from my life, except you were still everywhere." Her chest heaved as she crossed the room, stopping inches from him. "I sang about you too," she confessed. "But I let the world think it was about someone else. Do you know how humiliating it is to cry on stage for a ghost?" The air between them vibrated with unsaid things. Bruno reached out, then hesitated, his hand hovering again like it had outside, only now the tension was unbearable. "Why are you here, Rosé?" he asked, voice low. "Don't tell me it's coincidence." She swallowed hard. "Because I heard the demo you never released," she said. "Someone leaked 10 seconds. I recognized myself in the first note." His breath left him in a sharp exhale. "That song was never meant to exist." "But it does," she replied, "just like us." He laughed humorlessly. You think we can just pick this up again, after everything, after the damage?" Rosé stepped even closer until her hands pressed flat against his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. "I don't want easy," she said fiercely. "I want honest, even if it ruins us." That did it. Bruno's restraint shattered. He grabbed her wrists gently but firmly, pulling her hands up as if grounding himself in the reality of her touch. "You ruin me," he said, voice breaking. "You always have." "And you let me," she whispered, tears spilling over. "You let me think I imagined it." Their faces were inches apart, breaths mingling, the pull between them almost painful. For a split second, the past and present collided, every almost kiss, every goodbye that wasn't meant to be permanent. Then Rosé pulled her hands free and stepped back, wiping her tears with shaking fingers. "There's something else," she said, her tone shifting, heavy with consequence. "I didn't come alone." Bruno stiffened. "What does that mean?" She hesitated, then met his eyes. "The press knows I'm in Paris. If they find out I'm here with you, this won't be a rumor. It'll be a war." A bitter smile crossed his face. "So that's the controversy," he murmured. "Us." "No," she said softly. "The controversy is that I don't care anymore." He stared at her, stunned. "I'm tired of hiding," Rosé continued, voice trembling but resolute. "I'm tired of pretending my heart is negotiable. If loving you costs me everything, at least it will be the truth." Bruno crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms again, harder this time, desperate. "You shouldn't say that," he whispered into her hair. "Because if you fall, they won't catch you." "I know," she replied, clutching him just as tightly. "That's why I need to know. Right now, do you still love me?" He pulled back just enough to look at her, eyes burning, unguarded. "I never stopped," he said. "I just learned how to suffer quietly." Her sob turned into a broken laugh as she pressed her forehead to his. "Then stop," she pleaded. "Stop suffering without me." Outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the room, illuminating them locked together in the middle of a truth that could no longer be denied. Bruno closed his eyes, breathing her in, knowing that whatever came next, scandal, heartbreak, destruction, it would be irreversible. And for the first time in years, that terrified him less than letting her walk away again. The night deepened around them, Paris pressing closer to the windows, as if curious about the storm unfolding inside the room. Bruno loosened his grip slowly, as though afraid that any sudden movement might break whatever fragile truce they'd reached. Rosé stayed close, her hands still twisted in the fabric of his jacket, her knuckles white, as if letting go would mean surrendering years of restraint all over again. "You don't understand what they'll do," he said quietly, the fire in his voice now edged with fear. "They won't just talk about us, they'll dissect you, your choices, your past. They'll turn love into a scandal." She looked up at him, eyes blazing through tears. "They already did that when you left," she replied. "At least this time it would be for something real." That hit harder than any accusation. Bruno turned away again, dragging a hand down his face. "I watched you from a distance," he admitted, words spilling out faster now, like he'd finally lost the strength to hold them back. "Every award, every interview, every smile you forced when someone asked about love, and every time I told myself I was doing the right thing." Rosé laughed bitterly. "And I told myself you never looked back." He spun around sharply. "I looked back every day." Silence slammed between them, thick and electric. Rosé took a step back, shaking her head as if trying to steady herself. "Then why?" she demanded, voice rising. "Did you let me believe I was alone in this?" "Because if you thought I was gone," he said, pain raw on his face, "maybe you'd be free." Her breath hitched. "Free from what?" "From me," he whispered. The room seemed to tilt. Rosé pressed a hand to her chest, as if the ache there had suddenly become too much to bear. "You don't get to decide that," she said softly. "You don't get to love someone and then disappear to save them without asking." Bruno stepped closer, his voice breaking. "I was terrified that staying would cost you everything you worked for." "And leaving cost me you," she shot back. "How is that better?" He had no answer. The truth sat heavy and undeniable between them. Rosé moved toward the couch and sank down, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. "I tried to hate you," she confessed. "It would have been easier. I dated. I smiled. I pretended I moved on. But every time I closed my eyes, it was you I was running back to." Bruno's chest tightened as he followed her, crouching in front of her. "I ruined your peace," he said hoarsely. "You were my peace," she corrected, lifting her gaze to meet his. "And losing you broke something in me." The words shattered the last of his defenses. He reached for her face, cupping it gently, thumbs brushing away fresh tears. "I never wanted to be the reason you hurt." "Then don't be," she whispered. "Not anymore." Their foreheads touched again, breaths mingling, the tension unbearable but restrained, trembling on the edge of something dangerous and honest. Bruno closed his eyes, his voice barely audible. "If we do this," he said, "there's no hiding, no half-truths, no running when it gets ugly." A slow tear slid down Rosé's cheek. "Good," she said. "I'm tired of surviving quietly." A sudden vibration shattered the moment. Bruno froze as his phone lit up on the table, the screen flashing with a familiar name, his manager. Again and again. Rosé pulled back, her heart sinking as reality clawed its way back in. "They know," she murmured. He stared at the phone like it was a ticking bomb. "They suspect," he said, "which means they'll confirm." Rosé stood abruptly, panic flickering across her face. "Then we don't have much time." "To do what?" he asked. She met his eyes, resolve hardening beneath the fear. "To decide if we're worth the fallout." The phone buzzed once more, louder now, insistent. Bruno exhaled shakily, then did something neither of them expected. He turned the phone face down. Rosé's breath caught. "Bruno." "I've spent years choosing fear," he said, standing and facing her fully. "Just this once I want to choose you." Her lips trembled as she stepped into his arms again, clinging to him as if the world outside had already begun to collapse. "Whatever happens," she said into his chest, "don't disappear on me again." He held her tighter, voice fierce and broken. "I swear," he said, "if this burns, we burn together." Outside, Paris remained awake, unaware that inside a quiet apartment, two hearts were finally choosing truth over safety, no matter the cost. Morning crept into the apartment like an uninvited witness, pale and unforgiving, slipping through the thin curtains and revealing the wreckage of the night before. Neither of them had slept. They sat on opposite ends of the couch now, the space between them heavy with everything they had said and everything they still hadn't dared to. Bruno broke the silence first. "When this gets out," he said, voice low and rough, "they'll say you followed me, that you needed my name to stay relevant." Rosé's head snapped up. "Let them," she replied sharply. "I've been reduced to worse lies than that." "That's what scares me," he shot back, anger flashing. "You act like you're invincible, but I know how deeply you feel things. I know how comments stay with you." Her eyes burned. "And you think I don't know how they destroy you too?" she demanded. "You think I didn't see you shrinking every time you turned love into a joke just to survive interviews?" He stood abruptly, packing again, hands shaking. "Then why are we doing this?" he asked, almost pleading. "Why are we reopening something that nearly killed us?" Rosé rose to her feet, her voice breaking as she followed him. "Because it already did," she said. "And we lived anyway, just empty." The honesty of it stunned him. He stopped, turning to face her, his defenses visibly crumbling. "I was engaged," he blurted suddenly. The words hit like a gunshot. Rosé staggered back a step, color draining from her face. "What?" she whispered. "It didn't last," he said quickly, pain flooding his eyes. "It couldn't, because every time she touched me, I felt like I was betraying you." Silence swallowed the room. Rosé laughed once, hollow and sharp, then pressed a hand over her mouth as tears spilled over. "Do you know how cruel that is?" she asked. "To tell me now." "I know," he said, stepping closer despite her shaking. "And I hate myself for it, but you asked for truth." She wiped her tears furiously. "I almost married someone too," she admitted, voice trembling. Because I was tired of waiting for a ghost. That broke him. Bruno reached for her again, stopping only when she didn't pull away. Did you love him? He asked. I loved the idea of not hurting anymore, she replied softly. But every time he said my name, it didn't feel like yours. The room felt too small for the weight of their confessions. Outside, Paris woke fully, car horns, footsteps, life moving on without mercy. Inside, they stood exposed. Stripped of every illusion they'd built to survive apart. A sharp knock at the door made them both flinch. Rosé's eyes widened in panic. No, she whispered. It's too early. Bruno's jaw tightened. He moved toward the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. His face went pale. It's my manager, he muttered, and someone from your label. Rosé's breath came in shallow gasps. They found us. He turned to her, eyes blazing with something fierce and unyielding. This is it, he said. This is where we either lie again or we don't. She stepped forward, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. I won't deny you, she said. Not ever again. The knock came again, harder this time. Bruno opened the door. Voices flooded in immediately, controlled, urgent, furious. Accusations disguised as concern, warnings wrapped in legal language. Rosé stood beside him, chin lifted, refusing to shrink. This will explode, one of them said sharply. You need to shut this down now. Bruno looked at Rosé, then back at them. No, he said simply. The word echoed, shocking even himself. Rosé's hand slid into his, fingers trembling but firm. We're done being managed like mistakes, she added. If the world wants a scandal, they can have the truth. The room went silent. Later, when they were finally alone again, the adrenaline faded, leaving only exhaustion and aching vulnerability. Bruno sank onto the couch, pulling Rosé with him. She rested her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, breathing uneven. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. So am I, he replied, kissing the top of her head with a tenderness that nearly undid her. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. She turned to look at him, her expression softening into something painfully intimate. Promise me, she said, no more disappearing. He met her gaze, unwavering. I promise, he said, even if it costs me everything. Outside, Paris carried on, unaware that two lives had just crossed a point of no return, not in passion alone, but in truth, sacrifice, and a love that refused to stay hidden any longer. The news broke before noon. Phones vibrated like nervous hearts across the apartment, notifications stacking faster than Bruno could silence them. Headlines screamed speculation, photos blurred and cruel, the rain-soaked Paris street already dissected into 1,000 theories. Rosé stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching reporters gather below like dark birds sensing a story worth tearing open. They're saying I chased you, she said quietly, not turning around. That I planned this. Bruno crossed the room in 3 long steps. And they're saying I used you, he replied bitterly. That I needed your name to feel relevant again. She finally looked at him then, eyes blazing through exhaustion. Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds? I hear how dangerous it is, he shot back, fear slipping through his anger. They don't need the truth, they need a villain. Then let me be loud, Rosé said, voice rising. I'm done being quiet for people who profit from my silence. He grabbed her wrist, not harshly but urgently. You think this won't follow you forever? Every stage, every interview, this will be the first question they ask. And you think it hasn't already? She snapped, yanking her hand free. I've been living in the shadow of your absence for years. At least this way, it's honest. The tension between them burned, sharp and intimate, fueled by love and fear in equal measure. Bruno dragged a hand through his hair, packing. There's a press conference in an hour, he said. They want statements, denials, distance. Rosé laughed brittle. Distance, she repeated. That word ruined us once, don't let it do it again. He stopped in front of her, eyes dark, voice low. If I stand there and say your name, he said, there's no undoing it. Good, she replied, stepping closer until there was no space left to retreat. I don't want undoing, I want choosing. For a moment, he just stared at her. This woman who had survived his absence, the world's pressure, her own breaking heart, and still stood here asking for truth instead of safety. His shoulders sagged as something inside him finally gave way. I choose you, he said simply. The conference room was blinding with lights. Cameras clicked like weapons cocked and ready. Bruno felt Rosé's fingers lace through his, trembling but steady, and he held on as if anchoring himself to the only thing that mattered. Questions flew, accusations disguised as curiosity, smiles sharpened into traps. Are the rumors true? Is this a publicity stunt? Did this relationship begin before your previous commitments ended? Bruno leaned toward the microphone, breath slow, deliberate. I won't insult anyone by pretending this is simple, he said. We loved each other, we stopped, we suffered, and we found our way back. A murmur rippled through the room. Rosé took the mic next, her voice clear despite the storm inside her. I didn't follow anyone, she said. I followed my own truth, and for the first time, I'm not apologizing for it. The silence that followed was stunned, electric. After, when the doors finally closed and the world was held at bay by walls and guards, Rosé collapsed against Bruno, shaking. He wrapped her in his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple, holding her as if the noise outside could still reach them. That was terrifying, she whispered. That was brave, he replied. They left Paris that night quietly, the city lights fading behind them like a chapter closing. No rain this time, just the hum of the road, her head resting on his shoulder, his fingers tracing absent patterns on her sleeve, small, intimate gestures that felt revolutionary after years of restraint. Love didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the damage or silence the world, but it gave them something steadier than fear, the courage to stand in the open. And as the story spread, twisted by some, celebrated by others, one truth remained unshaken beneath every headline and every opinion. In a city that had witnessed countless loves rise and fall, theirs had survived the hardest thing of all: being hidden. In the end, Paris did not just witness their tears. It recorded a choice, one that proved even the most fragile love can become unbreakable when it finally refuses to stay silent.